Hello and welcome to Emirates 24/7.
Lots coming up for Wednesday night. Hashtag activism. We look at the ongoing power of Twitter to carry a cause, for better and for worse. Now, for being limited to 140 characters or less, Twitter's had a colossal impact on breaking news and its shaping views. A Pakistani man inadvertently broke the news of the operation that ended in Osama bin Laden's death. It's also been a cornerstone of all of the recent Arab Spring revolutions and a rallying point for the continued outrage over the victim of the Delhi gang rape.
It's firmly established its presence in the UAE as well, with press from around the world reporting on the UAE dress code campaign. And news of 25 Emirati women being flown to Bahrain yesterday to support the UAE national team also has Twitter sharply divided.
So is Twitter replacing traditional media as the key cultivator of public opinion? Or does its brevity and its speed sometimes lead to lazy journalism?
Well, here to discuss these questions is Alexander McNabb, one of the leading members of the UAE's Twitterati and the director of spotonpr. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I guess then looking at this central idea of traditional media, how it's appropriated Twitter, maybe even looking at the story that we saw out today about the 25 Emirati women and sort of the divided opinion about whether this was culturally appropriate or not. How have you seen Twitter being used by traditional media? What's your take?
Well, Twitter is a very powerful platform for people to express opinion very, very quickly, and for people to take that expressed opinion and share it and reshare it, what they call retweeting. So you can get a very powerful snapshot of opinion. You can also get a very powerful feed of news from the actual events. I remember in particular the National Paints fire being tweeted by a chap whose car was in the middle of the fire and burning, and he was the one that broke the news. And in fact, on Dubai Radio, I was running on a show at the time, and we actually broke the news on the show because we had access to the guy's Twitter feed. So that's a great example of journalism feeding from a tweet. And that these days is happening more and more. Very famously, the US Airlines jet that landed in the Hudson River was on Twitter and TwitPicked within 10 minutes, and Reuters picked it up from Twitter. So there's a great source of information from eyewitnesses on the scene. So you've got a mixture of eyewitness and you've got a mixture of opinion. And so those are very much these days driving journalism. I think one of the problems you have is that lazy journalism can be driven from a single tweet, and that you have to have some sort of context for opinion. 2 or 3 polarized opinions does not an outrage make.
Because that's
True.
what I wanted to pick up on, actually, in terms of accuracy, and does it always paint the real picture? And in the case this week about a lot of outrage about these women going to Bahrain to watch this football match, it certainly didn't seem like it was that many people as had been reported potentially in the press. So how do you navigate something like that?
You've got to take care, and one of the great debates from journalists in the early days of Twitter, who were arguing for the relevance of news journalism and the profession of journalism against this unfiltered feed of public opinion and news and views, was that journalism provides context and analysis. And the trouble you've got is your willingness to provide that and then lose the moment. Because Twitter has the moment, and if you wait to provide context and analysis, the danger is that your story is 8 or 10 or 12 hours later, and everybody's moved on by then to the next great story breaking on Twitter, because the internet has made us all flippity gibbets. So how do you then do that? Do you join in the fray and then make it all worse, or do you wait for your context and analysis? And the internet in general works on polarity. So for instance, I am outraged by something, I express my outrage, I gather people around to share in my outrage, and then the internet tends to balance it out. There are people who say, no, hang on a second, be more reasonable, let's be reasonable about this. I'll gather people around me who are reasonable, and so it'll balance it, the outraged versus the reasoned, the positive and negatively polarised. The problem you've got now is that journalism takes the outrage and runs away with that as its story before the polarisation is balanced by the rest of the internet. So journalism is amplifying the outrage stories. The Madonna concert in Abu Dhabi, there was a very famous story that ran talking about the outrage of fans about Madonna's lateness. It was based on, I think, 4 tweets in total, one of which was a girl who works with me who was based in Dubai saying, I'm exhausted before the Madonna madness starts. She was talking about her working day before she ever started driving to Abu Dhabi. So you've got the problem there that journalism can really take tweets and amplify them out of context and create outrages where none existed.
I mean, I guess, as a sort of, a side point to the same issue, when you look at the speed of Twitter, and indeed the power, obviously the fact that just a few tweets really can be carried away, Is there any danger with that, not just in terms of journalism, but in general, obviously, that anyone, quote unquote, could be a hashtag activist?
Yeah, anybody can, and that's one of the wonderful things about it. Anybody can make their voice heard. And I think the importance in journalism is saying, well, okay, as journalists, we need to understand this medium properly. We need to understand the nature of sentiment online. We need to understand the metrics that mean you can measure things like Twitter. And then we will contextualize those and give our readers or our listeners or our viewers a properly thought through version of these events, instead of trying to rush to be at the forefront and beat Twitter at its own game, which you can't do. But by the same token, when you have mendacious executives pretending that an event hasn't happened, or a fire in their building hasn't happened, or their supertanker hasn't crashed, that can no longer wash. So the news is out there, it's in every man's hands. I think it's in the hands of journalism to take that news and say, well, hang on a second, let us give you some extra context. That still is a role of journalism, but the speed, the time you have to do that in is so much smaller. It means more resources, more dedication from journalists, more last-minute work, and of course that's taking place at a time when journalism is under such huge pressure because the revenues in journalism are being leached away by the internet. So it's actually a huge problem. Twitter in its own way is democratizing and possibly de-democratizing.
It's a difficult situation. Very quickly before we go, we have seen some very successful UAE-born Twitter campaigns. What do you think is the secret, the main factors to making sure your campaign or an individual both is successful and for the right reasons?
I think a lot of the stuff that we've seen on Twitter that's been about grassroots campaign and successful hashtags and so on is about opinion, profoundly held opinion, and about views. And I think people can express their views on Twitter, and if their views are popular and are met by other people, they will get amplified. So I think it's hard to artificially create a Twitter campaign. I think you need to say or do something that people get behind. And if you can get people behind you, yeah, you can make a fuss.
Absolutely. Well, Alexander, thank you so much for being with us and, of course, sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. See you in